always thought I knew everything about my life, about my marriage. I had this perfect little suburban setup, the kind people in Chicago talk about when they're scrolling through Instagram, showing off their backyard decks, weekend brunches, and family dinners. My name's Emily. I'm 32, and I live in Naperville, just outside Chicago. My husband Ryan had this kind of energy that made him seem untouchable, like he could walk into any room and own it without trying too hard. We met in college. He was a business major, I was in marketing, and somewhere between senior year and the day we moved into our first condo, I fell for the version of him I thought I could trust with my entire world. I never imagined that world could collapse just because of a suitcase. It started subtle, with these tiny inconsistencies that I dismissed because I wanted to believe the best. Ryan travels a lot for his work. He's got this financial consulting firm, claims half his success comes from rubbing elbows with high-profile clients in Chicago. I trusted him. I really did. He'd leave on Mondays, say it was just a quick client meeting, and be back by Thursday night. At first, it seemed normal. I'd stock up on groceries, plan my week around his schedule, maybe invite friends over for wine nights while he was gone. But then the little things started gnawing at me, this sense of unease that I couldn't shake. He'd be vague about his meetings, sometimes arriving home with new cologne I didn't recognize, a receipt from a hotel I didn't know he'd booked. I told myself I was imagining things. I rationalized. That was my first mistake, thinking love could be blind and that doubt was just insecurity. I remember the Thursday he didn't come home. He called from his hotel around 10 p.m., voice smooth, calm, like nothing was off. He said, "Traffic was brutal. Chicago's gridlock is a nightmare. I'll be back in the morning." Normally, I'd say, "Okay, see you tomorrow." But that night, something about his tone was off. Maybe it was the way he paused before saying morning, like he was measuring every syllable. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a twinge in my gut I tried to ignore. I poured myself some wine and scrolled through my phone, trying to distract myself. That's when I noticed his suitcase wasn't where he usually left it. Normally, it sits at the end of our bed, neatly packed, zipped shut, ready for his next trip. Tonight, it was tucked awkwardly under the bed, partially hidden. It seemed innocent enough. Maybe he just didn't have time to put it away, but something about it made me pause. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the edge of the zipper, heart thumping. It's funny how denial can feel like armor. I told myself, "It's nothing, Emily, just let it go." But then curiosity won. I slid the suitcase out, careful not to wake the baby monitor in the next room. Ryan's clothes were packed as usual, shirts folded, socks tucked neatly. But then I saw it. A second phone, slim, black, perfectly placed in a side compartment that I had never noticed. My hand shook as I picked it up. There was no case, no markings, no way to identify it as his in a casual glance. I felt a flash of panic. This wasn't just a phone. This was evidence, a whole other reality I hadn't been prepared for. My mind raced. Why would he need a second phone? He has his work phone, his personal phone. Why a secret one? The rational side of me tried to calm down, telling myself, maybe it's for business clients who insist on texting privately. But another, darker part of me screamed that something was wrong, that I was about to see the side of him he had carefully hidden from me for years. I debated for hours, pacing the bedroom, phone in hand. Part of me wanted to leave it, pretend I hadn't seen anything, keep my life exactly as it was. But I couldn't. The temptation to peek was unbearable. I unlocked it. Thankfully, he hadn't set a passcode, and the screen lit up, flooding the room with messages that instantly turned my stomach into ice. There were texts, pictures, videos, conversations with a woman whose name I didn't recognize. Not just flirty messages, not the occasional hey, but intimate, detailed exchanges. She knew his schedule, he knew hers. They had routines, plans. They talked about meeting up during his business trips, calling it a quick coffee when it was clearly more than that. My mind was racing, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling physically sick, staring at the screen, trying to comprehend the reality that the man I loved, the man I had trusted with every part of me, had been lying to me in the most blatant way imaginable. I felt rage, yes, but it was mixed with confusion, betrayal, disbelief. Every memory we had, the dinner dates, the quiet Saturday mornings in our condo, the vacations to Lake Michigan, suddenly felt tainted. I replayed conversations in my head, trying to pinpoint the exact moment he had started this, when the cracks began to show. And yet there was still a part of me that wanted to believe it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that maybe I was misreading everything. That's when the guilt hit me. Guilt for snooping, guilt for letting this secret consume me, guilt for not noticing sooner. But the proof was undeniable. He had been leading a double life, and now the reality of it was sitting in my hands,
cold and unyielding. I spent the night going through messages, photos, everything. There were hundreds of them, organized almost methodically. It wasn't just a fling, it was a full-on affair. They met in hotels, she sent him gifts, he sent her notes, sweet, romantic, casual, like their lives were intertwined in a way mine wasn't supposed to know. I felt like I was unraveling, the threads of my life fraying with each new message. And then I found something that made my stomach drop even further, a few messages indicating she knew about our marriage. They weren't secret exchanges about some fleeting passion. This woman was aware of the life I had with him, and he was still choosing to see her. It was deliberate, calculated, cruel. I wanted to throw the phone, smash it against the wall, erase the evidence of his betrayal entirely. But I couldn't stop reading, couldn't stop looking at the proof of everything he had been hiding from me. The more I saw, the more the anger took over. And somewhere under that anger was a hollow, aching sadness that made me feel numb. By morning, I felt trapped in my own home. The sun had risen, the baby was asleep, and Ryan still hadn't returned. I paced the living room, pretending to tidy up, trying to appear normal in the quiet suburban morning. When he walked through the door, suitcase in hand, I watched him, studying his face for any hint of guilt or remorse. He smiled, said, "Hey baby, traffic was insane. I'm exhausted." I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand to know everything right there on the spot. But instead, I nodded, my voice tight as I said, "Welcome home." Inside, I was screaming, heart racing, mind spiraling. How could he act so normal, knowing what I knew now? I could see the subtle little things. He tried to hide the tiredness in his eyes, the faint smirk when he thought I wasn't looking, the way he moved the suitcase as if it were a normal routine.
I wanted to confront him, rip the truth out, but I also needed to survive the day, to not make a scene while we were technically in public space, even if it was just our living room. I forced myself to keep calm, to act as if I were just a tired wife greeting her husband after a trip, while every fiber of my being wanted to explode. The first confrontation had to wait. I didn't sleep well that night. Couldn't sleep at all, really. I stayed up in our bedroom, phone hidden under my pillow, rereading messages, analyzing every detail, looking for patterns, trying to understand why, how, and when. The betrayal felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. And yet, there was this sick, twisted part of me that wanted to catch him in a lie again, to see if he could keep up the facade, to understand the depth of his deceit. I hate that I admit it, but the curiosity was part of the pain. Like I needed to prove to myself that this wasn't some mistake, that he had indeed been lying consistently, methodically. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had lived in a bubble of ignorance, convincing myself that a business trip was routine, that a missed dinner or a suspicious text was harmless. I had been blind, and now the truth was as brutal as the cold March wind that swept through the streets outside our Naperville home. That next day, I tried to act normal. I went to work, made small talk with coworkers, pretended nothing had happened. But everything felt different. Every laugh, every glance from Ryan felt loaded with tension. I caught him staring at me at odd moments, as if he sensed something had shifted but couldn't put a finger on it. I couldn't help but imagine him on those trips, meeting her in Chicago hotels, sharing moments that should have been ours. The realization was overwhelming. I thought about confronting him publicly, at home, in a place that was ours, but now felt invaded by his secrets. I wanted him to see me, really see me, not the Emily who smiles and nods, but the Emily who knew, who had evidence, who had every right to crumble, scream, and demand answers. But I also feared the reaction. Ryan has this charm, this ability to deflect, to twist situations to his advantage. I had to be smart, patient, strategic. That night, I hid the second phone back in its compartment, acting as if I hadn't seen a thing, but the truth was searing into my mind. I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unhear the messages, the laughter, the plans, the hidden life he had created. I was living in the same house with a stranger, a man I had married but didn't know anymore. And then came the breaking point. A week later, after another business trip he claimed was routine, I came home early from work, pretending to have a client meeting nearby. I wanted to see if his story held up. I parked a few blocks away, watched him pull into the driveway, suitcase in hand. He waved, smiling like everything was normal.
But that day, I noticed a new pattern, something subtle yet damning. He looked around, checking if anyone was watching, then ducked into the garage instead of the front door. A quick glance toward the street, then a phone call in hushed tones. I didn't recognize the number. My heart sank. I knew. I just knew. That was the moment I realized the second phone wasn't just a backup. It was a lifeline to a life he had built without me, a world I was never invited into. It was deliberate, cruel, precise. My stomach churned. Tears threatened to spill. And yet I couldn't move. I couldn't confront him. Not yet. Not when the evidence was still in my hands, waiting for me to decide what to do next. I spent that evening replaying every interaction we had over the past year, over the past 5 years. I thought about the nights he claimed he was working late, the mornings he said were filled with client calls, the trips to Chicago that were supposedly routine. Each one now felt like a betrayal, a carefully constructed lie that had fooled me, made me blind, made me doubt my own instincts. And somewhere in the chaos of my thoughts, I realized the hardest part wasn't just the affair. It was the realization that I had been living a lie for years, that the man I loved and trusted could be so cunning, so meticulous, so utterly selfish. The betrayal wasn't just in the act, it was in the planning, the secrecy, the deliberate deception that had been part of my life for far longer than I ever knew. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't even mention it. I went to bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what I had discovered pressing down on me. I thought about our wedding, our vows, the promises we made in front of friends and family, and I felt a hollow emptiness, as if every word had been meaningless, as if the life I thought we were building together was nothing but a carefully crafted illusion. And yet, despite all that, a part of me still loved him. That part of me still wanted to believe there was a chance to fix things, to salvage some part of our life together. I hated myself for it, hated that a small part of me still clung to him, even as the proof of his betrayal burned in my hands. I realized then and there that the road ahead wasn't just about confronting him, it was about surviving the aftermath, about navigating a world where the man I thought I knew was no longer recognizable, and I was left to piece together the fragments of my shattered trust, wondering if anything would ever feel normal again. I woke up that morning feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The apartment was quiet, sunlight spilling through the blinds, but inside I was anything but calm. My stomach was still tied in knots from the night before, my brain replaying every message, every picture, every moment of deceit I had uncovered. I couldn't eat breakfast. I couldn't focus on work. I just sat on the edge of our bed, gripping the sheets, staring at the wall, trying to figure out how to move forward. It felt like I was standing on a cliff, looking down at a world I didn't recognize, and every step I had taken with Ryan had been on borrowed trust, on illusions. I had to know more. I had to see the full picture, even if it broke me in the process. That day, I came up with a plan. I pretended to have a client meeting downtown, but really I was tracking him. Not in a creepy, over-the-top way. Well, maybe a little, but more like survival instinct. I needed to know if the Chicago trips he claimed were routine were actually what they seemed. I parked a few blocks away from the office building he said he would be at, and waited. For hours, I watched people come and go. Men in suits, women in heels, clients carrying portfolios. I saw Ryan step out around noon, phone pressed to his ear, a briefcase in the other hand, moving with that same smooth, confident stride that had once made me proud. But then he didn't walk toward a client's office. He didn't head into any of the conference rooms. He ducked into a hotel lobby across the street, glanced around like he expected someone, and then disappeared into the elevator. My heart dropped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It took me a moment to process, but the truth hit me like a punch in the gut. He wasn't working. He was meeting her, the woman from the second phone. The realization made my hands tremble, my vision blur.
I sat in my car for what felt like hours, watching the entrance of the hotel, every flicker of movement sending jolts through me. He came out hours later, the same confident stride, smiling as if nothing had happened. I wanted to scream, to run after him, to demand an explanation in front of everyone, but I knew it wouldn't give me the control I craved, not yet. I had to have more evidence, more clarity before confronting him. That night, when he got home, he was tired, but there was an energy in him that I couldn't miss, a buzz in the way he moved, the subtle smirk when he thought I wasn't watching. He tossed his briefcase on the dining room table and said, "Dinner's in the fridge. I'm exhausted. How was your day?" I nodded, pretending everything was fine, trying to act normal, even though inside I was screaming. I wanted to throw the phone on the table, demand to know who she was, why she existed, why he had built this whole secret life while I was at home worrying about him. But I didn't. Instead, I poured wine into my glass, sat across from him, and studied his face like I was learning a new language, the language of someone who had been lying to me for years, someone I thought I knew, but didn't. Days turned into weeks, and I became a silent observer in my own home. I tracked his trips, noted the dates, watched patterns emerge. Chicago wasn't routine. It was a carefully constructed schedule designed around meetings with her. He would tell me he was working late on a Wednesday night, only to sneak off to a hotel in River North. He would claim traffic, or a delayed flight, or a client emergency. But the evidence was undeniable. I started recording everything: texts, emails, pictures from the hotel lobbies he visited. I felt like a detective in my own life, piecing together the puzzle of his betrayal, even as every piece I found stabbed me in the heart. I remember one night, lying in bed, the second phone hidden under my pillow, scrolling through messages that made me feel sick and furious all at once. She called him pet names, sent selfies in hotel rooms, detailed messages about their plans to meet during his trips. And he responded with the same kind of intimacy he used to reserve for me, the same tenderness I had thought was ours alone. I couldn't believe how calculated it all was. The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't a one-time mistake, not some lapse in judgment. This was a fully orchestrated affair, and I had been living blind, pretending to trust a man who had been living a parallel life right under my roof. One evening, after a particularly long trip he insisted was mandatory for a client pitch, I decided to follow him again. This time I rented a zip car, parked 2 blocks from his supposed meeting, and trailed him without any hesitation. He didn't take the office, he didn't meet a client. He walked straight into a boutique hotel in the Gold Coast, checked in, and disappeared. My chest tightened. I wanted to run up and confront him in that moment, demand answers, scream until my throat was raw, but I stayed in my car. I watched him through the hotel windows, saw him laughing, heard bits of his voice, and felt my stomach twist into knots. It was surreal, like watching someone else live the life I thought I had. I stayed until he left, took down license plates, hotel names, times, every detail. By the time I got home, my hands were raw from writing everything down, and I felt exhausted, defeated, and hopeless. When I finally confronted him, I didn't start with accusations. I had to be strategic, had to be sure he couldn't manipulate the narrative. I said nothing about the second phone. Instead, I asked about Chicago trips, about work schedules, about hotel stays he had never mentioned. He smiled, deflected, gave me vague answers, and I saw it, the little flicker of panic in his eyes when he thought I didn't know. It was enough to confirm what I already suspected. He was aware I was suspicious, and that awareness alone was dangerous. The next night, I pulled the second phone from its hiding spot, placed it on the table between us, and simply said, "Explain this." He froze, a brief flicker of color draining from his face. He tried to laugh it off, make a joke, but I could see it in his eyes. Guilt, fear, something raw and human that I had never seen before. The confrontation wasn't explosive at first. We didn't yell, at least not immediately. He stammered, tried to claim it was for work, that it was just business, that she was a client. I looked at him, the room silent except for our breathing, and I realized I didn't recognize this man anymore. The Ryan I married, the Ryan I loved, the one I trusted with my life didn't exist. This version of him was someone else entirely, someone who could lie with a straight face, someone who could build a life in parallel to mine and never feel the weight of his betrayal. I felt something crack inside me, a deep, raw grief that I couldn't put into words. I wanted to scream, cry, hit something, anything, but mostly I just felt hollow. In the weeks that followed, the tension in our home became unbearable. I stopped pretending. I watched him closely, tracked his movements, read his messages, and cataloged everything. Every return from Chicago became a test. Every interaction felt loaded with meaning, like walking on a tightrope over an endless abyss. Friends noticed the change, asking why I seemed distant, why Ryan was so quiet, and I just smiled, giving them vague answers, because how could I explain that my husband had been living a secret life for months, maybe years, and I was sitting there, rebuilding my trust in the ruins. I started thinking about our marriage in ways I never had before, questioning everything. The shared laughs, the vacations, the late-night conversations, were they real or were they just another layer of his deception? I realized that trust, once broken like this, doesn't rebuild itself easily. Every time he said he loved me, every time he smiled, every time he acted like nothing had changed, I felt my resolve weakened and strengthened simultaneously. I loved him, yes, but I hated what he had done. I wanted him to feel the weight of his betrayal, to understand that trust once broken isn't easily repaired. And yet, the more I hated him,
the more I wanted answers. I needed closure. I needed to know why he chose this path, why he risked everything we had built for a secret life with someone else. I confronted him multiple times, each confrontation peeling back layers of lies. He admitted to parts of it, but never the full truth. He claimed it was only emotional at first, then physical later, but his explanations didn't make sense. They never do when someone has been deliberately deceptive for this long. I felt like I was chasing shadows, trying to piece together a story that he didn't want me to understand. Every admission was a half-truth, every apology calculated, like he was testing the limits of my tolerance, seeing how much I could take before I snapped. Sleep became impossible. Every night I lay awake, thinking about the evidence, thinking about Chicago, thinking about her. I imagined the hotel rooms, the laughter, the hidden life he led while I was at home, folding laundry, cooking dinners, worrying about bills, trying to maintain a life that was only partially mine. I felt rage, yes, but also an overwhelming sadness that made it hard to breathe.
I questioned myself constantly. Did I miss the signs? Was I too trusting? Too naive? The guilt was suffocating, almost as if I had somehow allowed this to happen because I had been too blind, too eager to believe in the man I loved, rather than the man he had become. By the time the third week rolled around, I realized something crucial. I couldn't let him control the narrative anymore. I couldn't let his deception dictate my emotions, my thoughts, my life. I had to confront the reality head-on, fully, without hesitation. I started planning, quietly, meticulously, how to get every piece of information I could, how to protect myself, how to understand the depth of the betrayal so I could make decisions with clarity rather than desperation. I felt a strange empowerment in this process, a cold clarity that mixed with the heartbreak. I realized that while he had shattered my trust, I could reclaim my power by knowing everything, by never allowing myself to be blindsided again. And yet, despite all of this, I couldn't stop loving him. That contradiction, this messy, impossible combination of hatred and longing, was the cruelest part. I hated him for what he had done, for the life he had built in secret, for the lies and manipulation. But I loved him because he had been part of my life for so long, because he had shared moments of genuine intimacy, moments that weren't all lies. It was a dangerous, suffocating mix, and I knew it would either destroy me or force me to become stronger than I ever thought I could be. The tension in our house had become unbearable, like living inside a pressure cooker where every look, every word, every movement was loaded with unspoken truths. I couldn't escape it. I'd catch Ryan staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking, eyes flicking with something between guilt and calculation, and I'd respond with a neutral expression, careful not to give away how much I knew. It was exhausting. I began to sleep on the couch some nights, just to have space from him, to separate myself from the man who had built this hidden world behind my back. Every night I stared at the second phone hidden under my pillow, reading the messages over and over, trying to memorize everything in case he tried to delete them, erase his tracks, pretend it never happened. One Friday night, after another business trip he swore was mandatory, I decided I needed to see him in Chicago myself. I booked a cheap flight under the guise of visiting a friend, but really I just wanted to watch, to follow him, to see the extent of what he'd built without me. Landing in the city, the wind hitting my face, the streets alive with Friday night energy, I felt a strange mix of adrenaline and dread. I rented a car and traced the route he would take from the airport to wherever he claimed to be working. I followed him to a hotel in the Loop, this sleek glass tower he'd never once mentioned in our conversations about clients. He entered, suitcase in hand, and I parked across the street, hidden, watching. I couldn't see the entire room, but I could make out silhouettes, shadows moving across windows. I saw him pull someone close. Her. The same woman from the messages. My chest tightened, heart hammering, stomach turning over. They weren't cautious. They laughed, touched, whispered. This wasn't just casual. This was intentional, unrestrained, brazen. I felt rage, humiliation, and grief collide all at once. I wanted to run up, confront him, throw something, scream until my lungs gave out, but I stayed. I stayed because I knew if I acted impulsively, it would be chaos. I had to know how deep it went before I exposed him, before I confronted him in a way that made him accountable. Back in Naperville, the days blurred together. Work, errands, home life, and the secret surveillance of my husband's life all meshed into one exhausting routine. I started noticing patterns. He would leave on Monday nights, always claim a client emergency, return Thursday evening, but now I could anticipate the hotel, the room, the timing, even the way he carried himself. I became a shadow, hyper-aware of his every movement. Friends began asking why I seemed distant, why Ryan seemed more guarded, and I brushed it off with vague explanations about stress and travel. The truth was unbearable. The man I married had been living a separate life for months, maybe years, and I was witnessing it unfold in real time. One night, after another return from Chicago, I finally confronted him again. This time, I didn't bring up the second phone. I waited until he was unpacking, distracted by work, and asked casually, "So, Chicago this week. Busy schedule?" His head snapped up, and I caught that flash of panic, the subtle tremor in his smile. "Yeah, standard meetings. You know how it is," he said, avoiding my eyes. I leaned against the counter, pretending to check a recipe on my phone, watching him carefully. Standard meetings had become the lie of the week, and I knew it. I knew exactly where he'd been. The tension in the room was suffocating, but I held my ground, letting the silence stretch. Finally, he muttered, "Emily, but stopped. He didn't finish. He rarely did. The truth, when it came in fragments, pieces here and there, a hesitant confession, a slippery explanation, each one partially true but missing critical parts. He admitted to meeting her, but insisted it was just emotional support, that it had never been physical. I could feel the lie radiating off him. I pressed, and he faltered, finally admitting some of what I already knew: dinners, drinks, secret texts, hotel rooms. He didn't tell me everything, not by a long shot, but enough to confirm that my gut had been right all along. The betrayal wasn't casual. It was methodical, planned, and deliberate. He had been living a parallel life without me, while I believed in the trust we'd built together. The emotional fallout was brutal. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. I felt hollow, enraged, heartbroken, and utterly alone, even when he was in the same room. I stopped going out with friends, stopped answering casual calls, stopped pretending everything was fine. I became a ghost in my own life, haunted by the knowledge that the man I loved had betrayed me so thoroughly. Every room in our house felt like a stage for his lies, every shared memory tainted by the knowledge of what had been happening behind my back. I started documenting everything meticulously: dates, hotel names, times, texts, pictures, every movement I could confirm. It was exhausting, and yet I felt some grim sense of control. If he wanted to play this game, I would play too. Only I was documenting the truth, creating a record of what he had done. I felt like a detective, but it was more than that. It was survival. I had to know everything before I could make any decisions about us, about the marriage, about whether I could even stand to be in the same house with him. Then came the day I accidentally opened his email on his laptop while he was in the shower. I told myself I wasn't snooping, that I was just checking something mundane, but what I found changed everything. There were travel itineraries, receipts, confirmations, emails from her. He had booked weekend trips, supposedly for team-building exercises and client entertainment, but the reality was hotel rooms and dinner reservations for two. The audacity of it made my blood boil. I couldn't understand how he could live like this, how he could maintain the life he had with me while simultaneously building a secret world for someone else. It wasn't just betrayal, it was meticulous, cold, deliberate deceit. I confronted him again that night. This time, I placed everything on the table: the second phone, the emails, the receipts, the itinerary. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize immediately. He tried to explain, to justify, to make excuses, but I was done listening. The rage I felt was primal, consuming, and yet beneath it was a deep, hollow sadness that made me feel untethered. I realized that the man I married was gone. This version of him, the one living in secret, the one capable of these betrayals, was someone I didn't recognize. I loved him, yes, but I no longer knew him. The house we shared felt like a stage set for a life I had believed in, but that never existed. After that confrontation, the atmosphere in our home became unbearable. Ryan tried to maintain normalcy, to act like nothing had happened, but I couldn't let it go. I started monitoring his trips more aggressively, tracking his movements, intercepting calls, confirming hotel reservations, all while pretending to be calm, to be composed. Every lie, every evasive answer, every flinch when I asked a simple question was fuel for my anger, for my meticulous documentation. I realized I had become obsessed, not with revenge, but with truth, with fully understanding the scope of his betrayal. And yet, amidst all the chaos, there was a strange, dangerous longing. Despite the lies, the deception, the heartbreak, I still felt drawn to him, still wanted some part of what we had. That contradiction terrified me. How could I hate someone so completely and still love them? How could someone ruin my life so thoroughly, and yet the memories of love, intimacy, and shared moments still anchor me in a way that made me hesitate? It was confusing, destructive, and yet intensely human. I was living in the space between rage and love, between betrayal and desire, and it was tearing me apart. Sleep became impossible.
I stayed awake late into the night, scrolling through texts, studying itineraries, replaying conversations in my head, analyzing his tone, looking for lies. I felt consumed by this secret knowledge, and yet I couldn't let it go. It was my tether to reality, my proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. I realized that I couldn't trust him, couldn't coexist peacefully with him, and yet couldn't walk away entirely because I needed to know everything first. This obsession, this need to fully understand the betrayal, became a kind of coping mechanism, a way to survive the emotional devastation. Then came a revelation that shook me deeper than anything else. I found out she knew more than I thought. She wasn't just a casual affair partner. She was aware of our marriage. There were messages indicating she'd known about me from the beginning, and yet she continued the relationship, continued the meetings, the intimate messages, the planned encounters. The cruelty of it made my blood boil, but also clarified the reality. This wasn't a mistake, an error in judgment, or a fleeting attraction. This was a deliberate, ongoing choice by both of them, a secret life built on deception, lies, and betrayal. I finally realized I had two choices: confront it now, risk everything in a chaotic explosion, or continue documenting, tracking, and understanding the full scope before acting. I chose the latter. I had to understand the entire picture, no matter how much it broke me, no matter how long it took. I had to gather proof, evidence that I could rely on, evidence that wouldn't be denied, evidence that captured the depth of his duplicity. It became my mission, my obsession, my lifeline in the chaos of betrayal. Every time he returned from a Chicago trip, I felt the weight of anticipation, dread, and fury. Watching him move through our house, pretending to be normal, pretending nothing had happened, was like navigating a minefield. I had to measure every word, every glance, every reaction. The house felt hostile, charged, a living reminder of trust shattered beyond repair. And yet in that charged environment, I became to understand something terrifying. Love doesn't disappear because of betrayal. Hate and love can coexist, and living with both in the same room can drive a person to the edge of sanity. It all came to a head one Saturday evening. Ryan had returned from a Chicago trip that I knew had been spent with her. I could feel it the moment he stepped into the house. There was a lightness in his step, a smugness he couldn't hide, no matter how he tried to smile casually. I was standing in the kitchen, pretending to prep dinner, but my hands were trembling, knife clutched too tightly. I could hear him in the living room, dropping his suitcase with that practiced casual motion, the one that always made it seem like he'd been nowhere suspicious at all. I waited, listening to him hum softly, pretending the house was just as normal as any other Friday night. But the truth was, nothing was normal anymore. Not for me, not for us, and certainly not for him. I had made the decision. I couldn't live in this suspended state of betrayal any longer. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I put the second phone on the counter, where he couldn't miss it, and when he walked into the kitchen, his eyes flicked to it instantly. I didn't say anything. I just folded my arms and stared. The silence between us was unbearable. I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched ever so slightly. He opened his mouth, probably to invent some new excuse, but I cut him off. "Explain this," I said, voice steady, colder than I thought I was capable of. For a moment he froze. He looked at me, really looked, like he was finally seeing me as something other than someone he could lie to. And for the first time in months, I saw fear. Not the casual kind, not the performance of charm he always used, but genuine fear. He stumbled over his words, tried to spin a story about business contacts, emergency clients, how it was just work, nothing else, but the evidence was undeniable. I placed a few printed emails and receipts next to the phone, all the hotel stays, all the Chicago trips that didn't exist on any work calendar, all the messages that showed a life he had been living for months without me. I watched as the color drained from his face. I can explain, he started, voice faltering. "It's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I interrupted, sharper than I intended. "You've been living a double life. For how long, Ryan? 2 years? 3? All those trips, all those excuses, every lie. I have the evidence right here." He sank into a chair, finally defeated. He ran his hands through his hair, his face pale. The confident, untouchable man I married was gone, replaced by someone small, scrambling, cornered by the truth he had tried so hard to bury. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying about love and betrayal. The people you think you know can live in parallel worlds, and you might never see it until it's too late. He started confessing in fragments, words tumbling out in desperation. He admitted to meeting her, admitted to the physical intimacy, admitted to the emotional connection he had built with her, admitted to lying
He tried to explain, to justify, to soften the blow, but every word he spoke only made the reality of his betrayal sharper, more painful. I felt my stomach twist, my chest tighten, and tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I needed to stay present, to absorb the truth fully, to witness the man I had loved unravel. I asked the questions I had been holding back for months, the ones that had haunted me in the quiet hours when the house was silent and my heart was racing. How long? How many times? Did she know I existed? Did you care at all? He stammered, hesitated, and then spilled the worst of it. She had known from the beginning. She had known he was married, and he had gone anyway, intentionally, fully aware. The realization was like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just infidelity, it was a deliberate, ongoing choice, a calculated betrayal that had been happening behind my back, right under my roof, in my home, in the life we had built together. I felt rage, overwhelming, blinding rage, and yet under it was an abyss of grief I couldn't escape. Every memory of our life together felt contaminated. Our anniversary dinners, quiet mornings with coffee, vacations to Michigan, all of it tainted by the reality of what he had been doing while I trusted him. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to break something, anything to make the physical world reflect the chaos inside me. But I also knew that nothing would bring back the years of deception. Nothing would erase the months and months of lies. I was left with the raw, aching truth, and I had to find a way to live with it. For days after that confrontation, the house was silent in a different way. Ryan was subdued, quiet, aware that the facade had crumbled. I kept my distance, watched him closely, and every time he moved or spoke, I saw the man I once loved replaced by someone I didn't recognize. I realized that trust, once shattered like this, doesn't rebuild itself. Every smile, every casual glance, every I love you was loaded with suspicion. Every interaction felt like navigating a minefield where the rules had changed overnight, and I wasn't sure if we could ever safely traverse it again. Despite everything, part of me still loved him. That realization terrified me. I hated him for what he had done, for the betrayal, for the lies, and yet there was this lingering, stubborn fragment of love that refused to die. I hated myself for it, for still feeling attached to the man who had shattered my world, for still craving some part of the intimacy and life we had shared. I couldn't reconcile the two, the love and the hatred, but I couldn't ignore either. I understood in that moment that betrayal changes you, not just in the way you see the other person, but in the way you see yourself. We began a tense negotiation of cohabitation. It wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It was about survival. I couldn't leave immediately. We had bills, responsibilities, a shared life that couldn't just vanish. But I couldn't stay in the same house pretending everything was normal. I made it clear he needed to be transparent. Every trip, every call, every interaction had to be documented. No more lies, no more secrets. And he complied, not out of remorse, but out of fear, out of necessity. Every day was a test, a reminder of what he had done, a constant challenge to maintain my sense of self, while living with the man who had betrayed me so profoundly. Over time, I started to rebuild. Not the marriage, not the love. I didn't know if that was possible, but myself. I reclaimed my space, my routines, my power. I spent more time with friends, more time on work, and I even began traveling on my own, experiencing independence I hadn't realized I needed. The house no longer felt like a stage for deception. It became neutral ground, a place where I could exist without constantly tiptoeing around his lies. And while I still felt pain, rage, grief, and lingering love, I also began to feel strength, a hard, fierce strength born from surviving the emotional hurricane of betrayal. Ryan remained in the house for a while, navigating his own consequences, facing the evidence, the truth, and the reality of what he had lost. I observed him, studied him, and I knew that some part of him would always carry the weight of what he had done. But I also knew that the life I had imagined, the life of trust, intimacy, and shared dreams, was gone. It couldn't be repaired with apologies or half-truths. What remained was something raw, real, and entirely my own. The understanding that love and betrayal can coexist, that people can be monsters and human at the same time, and that survival sometimes means walking away from everything you thought you knew. In the end, the second phone was never just a device. It was the catalyst, the undeniable proof that broke through years of denial, rationalization, and trust. It forced me to confront a reality I had avoided, to witness the man I loved as he truly was, and to reclaim my life from the shadow of betrayal. I kept it, not as a weapon, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The truth matters, even when it burns. And while the scars of his choices will always be part of me, I've learned that surviving someone else's deceit doesn't just reveal their character, it reveals yours.